I was looking through one of my boxes of cameras that I've got there for parts or repair. I have a few boxes of cameras like that, as you can well imagine. And I came across this one. I think we'll call this one the Warthog, eh? It's certainly got a very severe case of Zeiss bumps. Missing the surround from the tripod socket, and of course it doesn't go. So I thought we'd investigate this one, see exactly what's wrong with it. Perhaps I'll strip it, turn it back into a functioning camera. I certainly don't need another Retina IIa, but well, what are you going to do on a quiet day? So let's have a look at it. When I first picked it up, the film advance lever wouldn't move at all. Now it moves, frame counter does nothing, shutter does nothing. If I crank the focus out so I can see the curved rack here at the front, as I turn the focus, the film advance lever, nothing happens. So there's no coupling between the film advance and the shutter. So, can we tell any more from the top of the camera? There doesn't appear to be any action at all from the frame counter. So it could have a broken frame counter spring. If I rotate the dial here, when I get to number 1, we should get a pronounced click. Nothing. In fact, if we take it round to number 1, see if that locks. Something jammed up a bit, but I'm not sure it actually did the job. Listen carefully. Did you hear that click? Film advance is locked. That tells me something interesting. Here we are on frame 22 and the film advance is locked. That means that the counter dial is in 180 degrees out of correct position. So we know the counter dial is 180 degrees out from where it should be, which suggests that someone's been in there playing with the film advance and they've incorrectly assembled it. That's not very uncommon. Let's turn it away from there. It moves, but it doesn't cock anything. I suspect that it doesn't actually have a frame counter spring in there, and if it hasn't got the frame counter spring in there, one of the possibilities is that the film advance lever will actually swing further around this way. If it swings further around that way, it can actually push the cocking rack right out of the camera. And I suspect that's possibly what's happened. But we're only going to know if I jump in here and open this thing up. So let's have the top off, see what we can see. Well, the rewind is loose. It's so loose that it's falling off. That is a very good sign that someone's been in here. And the film advance, it's jamming there at about 90 degrees for no obvious reason. Let's swing that out, remove the screw, let's take the top off this. Well, what do you know? There's no frame counter spring in there at all. Everything else is here. but the dial is obviously 180 degrees out. So let's see what else we can find out. I expect that the shutter cocking rack is present, but has been pushed out of place. Here's the shutter cocking rack. It is well out of position. Yeah, it's just floating. It's not completely disconnected. Now getting that back connected again with the shutter in place would be next to impossible. But if we take the shutter out first and have a look, I'm sure I can achieve that. So what we want to do now is remove the lens and shutter assembly, get the shutter cocking rack back in position, timed correctly, with the mechanism at this point, put the top cover back on, put a frame counter spring in here, put the counter dial round the right way, and see if the film advance works. And if the film advance works, we'll put the shutter back in and see if the shutter works. And then we'll know that I will have identified the major defects, and I can decide what to do from there on in. So first I want this shutter assembly off here. Okay, now let's look at this film advance mechanism. Now, assuming that this has the correct tension, if I swing it right round the end of its travel, the lever at the front here will pop up. If I move it a bit further, I can actually swing the arm a bit further, you see, and I can engage the rack. Let's see if we can get this to feed in. It doesn't want to feed in. This is a bit sandy up in here. It could be that there's some grit. And it is the rack at this point that's blocking that from returning. Can't take that rack out completely without removing the rangefinder. It just doesn't want to mesh with the gear. Oh, there we go, it's in. That's probably okay in that position. It doesn't run smoothly at all. I suspect that there's problems there. Perhaps just from grit. There may be a damaged tooth on something. Let's put that in there. And I'll see if I can assemble this frame counter correctly. Normally I put some grease on this to hold it all together while I'm getting everything seated, but we'll just try putting this back together as it stands. Now this disc has normally got a scratch on it. That points you towards number 1. It was only done with the tip of a screwdriver or something. It's a rough answer, but it certainly served the purpose. Get that in place. Put the spring on there. See if I can get this seated on the top of the film advance. Of course, it's all trying to fall to bits. Now I'll rotate this clockwise. Yeah, I just felt that click down. We'll do the screw up. Now the frame counter should work if everything's good. It won't lock at number 1 because we need the top on the camera to do that. But first of all, oh, my frame counter's not turning there, so it's not. The disc is fallen out of line with the. Yeah, that disc is fallen out of line with the one below it. I'll probably have to glue this together with grease as I normally do. So we'll leave it as it is. At the moment it's set, it'll lock at number 21 or something, but I want to see if it actually works. Returns as normal. Now the wheel at the front of the camera here that cocks the shutter, that's turning. So the film advance now goes. We'll take this off, put the top on the camera, put everything back together. I'll have another go at the counter to get that dial round the right way. And then put the shutter back in place. I'll just put the screws back in the top cover. As long as I don't press the film release button, the film advance won't unwind and the film advance lever will be going back on at the orientation I normally do that at, which is at 90 degrees. About there. Let me look at my frame counter here. That's my scratch over here, so that points towards the number 1, which is there. It all depends on whether I can hold enough tension on this. Well, no, it's already slipped already. Yeah, and it's dropped into place 180 degrees out. I'm going to have to glue it with some grease. Well, looking at this, this was subtly bent. It obviously wasn't gripping correctly. But when I look at this, this is the top piece that the dial sits on. That's bent up. So it's holding this disc up and it's stopping it from engaging, because that has to engage with those slots there. So I'll see if I can press that malformed piece down, just like that. I'll put a touch of grease on here. Let's put that on there. Now, I'll put another touch of grease on here and use that to glue the counter disc in position. Like that. Put that on there, and once more into the fray. I think this time it'll go. So put the screw in. Snug it most of the way down, check that that's working. It looks like it is. Let's see if the film advance works. It does, and we have a frame counter. What about the shutter? Let's find out if that'll go. So, let's try this in the body. I'll rack the focus as far forward as I go, and I'll notice that didn't really want to go. The focus mechanism is obviously very stiff. And we'll get the timing of this right. So I've got it racked right forward. I'll lift that slightly and move my curved rack one tooth to the left. Why is that not dropping in? Oh, it's just my focus mechanism. Oh, did you hear that? So the shutter fires. We'll see if it actually cocks on a 500. That'll tell me if I'm correctly placed, because that requires a lot more force. No, it didn't. So I'm one tooth out. So I'll move it one tooth again. This camera's got other problems, I can tell. Okay, it now cocks and fires at a 500. That means I'm good to go there. I'll put the retaining ring back in place. Let's get that rewind correctly back on the top of the camera. That screw on that rewind knob is loose. So what have we got now? We've got a camera that fires. What's its slow speeds like? Let's try 10. Oh, it's a little bit sluggish. What about 1 second? Sticks. 1 second sticks. A 10th will run, but probably the slower speeds don't want to go. Oh, the 10th's not even going now. Let's try it at a 25th. Yeah, 25th's going. So here's the camera as it stands. It works after a fashion. We know the shutter needs servicing because it tends to stick at the slow speeds. This is not supposed to happen. It looks to me, I can see those bellows pumping in and out as I do that. That tells me that the screws that hold the focus mount to the front standard are probably loose. The door here doesn't really have much grip on this. These fingers, top and bottom on the door, haven't got much grip. So this means that this thing can float up and down a bit. That means that the point at which your shutter releases will float up and down depending on how you're holding the front of the camera. So the Warthog's obviously got the makings of a camera that could be made to go. And the question is, can anything be done with it? I expect so. We'll have that shutter back off and inspect that focus mechanism at the front of the camera. Of course we'll have the top off too, because I'll need that rangefinder coupling off. And we can check the state of those screws holding the focus mount to the front of the body, because I suspect that's the most serious problem that exists here. Right, I'll remove the retaining ring once more. Pop that shutter to one side. I'll take the top off the camera, remove the rangefinder, and so we can remove our rangefinder coupling. There doesn't really appear to be an awful lot of return action on that film advance. It's possible that that doesn't have enough tension. That's certainly easily fixed when the camera's apart. You'll notice that the camera is uniformly dirty. it may have been sitting out in someone's shed for a long time. Let's take the rangefinder off. Does the rangefinder work first of all? It pulls out and it returns. Okay, so the rangefinder works. I doubt that it's accurate, but you never know, it's a possibility. I could tell it was quite dirty. There's their rangefinder off the camera. We'll take this coupling screw out here. That's the screw that couples to the arm on the rangefinder. And that is coupled to this plate here on the front of the shutter, front of the focus mount. We'll have that out. That screw was loose. Our focus scale ring is held by 4 screws, and I'm going to mark the position of that so that it goes back in the same place it came from. It may or may not be correct there. So I'm just going to scribe a couple of lines across it. To the outer helical. From the focus scale ring to the outer helical. And the alignment of the inner helical with the outer helical, generally you have to look to that separately, because frequently to get those level you'd need to go right back past the infinity position, which of course you can't do with the focus scale ring in place. There are other alignment marks here which very likely are aligned when these 2 front surfaces are level. Okay, so what are these screws that I'm talking about holding the front standard and the focus mount together? Well, it's these 4 screws here at the corner. And as you can see, they are quite loose. With those screws tight, that rattle's instantly gone. I'll put this scale ring back on, reassemble it, and we'll look at the camera again and see if there are other obvious problems there. I can tell you that the grease on the focus helical here is dry and sticky, but that's no surprise. When you do the screws up holding the focus scale ring to the outer helical, don't over tighten them. They just need to be nipped up and no more. Let's put this back in place. It's our rangefinder coupling. There are 2 screws in the front plate. That upper one was loose, but of course that wouldn't have had a great deal of effect because the shutter assembly and its retaining ring would effectively have clamped this down hard in place anyway. Where's that other little screw? There it is. And the coupling pin at the top goes here. I'll put the shutter back on. I want to see if all the rattle on that shutter is now gone. To do that, of course, I want to check the film advance to make sure that's working correctly still. So I'll just put that back on the body. That looks good. The film advance is in place. I can put the shutter back in place. It's working in that position. It may be one notch out, but for our current purposes that's good enough because it's all going to come apart for cleaning anyway. Let's put the retaining ring in place. Nip that up tight. Okay, so we've got a shutter that works again, the film advance is working, counter's working. No rattle. No rattle. So our rattle with the here at the front was certainly caused by those 4 loose screws. The focus is quite stiff due to that dried grease, but otherwise it's working. If I was to put the rangefinder back on here, probably make a little adjustment, we would have a camera that probably works reasonably reliably on shutter speeds, say between a 25th and a 250th. Those speeds are probably slow, but they're probably reliable enough. You could certainly take photos with it. Any other faults here that could be easily dealt with? Any other faults that could be demonstrated and be dealt with easily? Well, I don't really notice anything else of great concern here. I would say the lens is a little bit dirty. The haze level doesn't look bad. I would say that it was a reasonable prospect for servicing this camera. Whether it can be made to look beautiful is completely a different thing altogether. That top cover is uniformly filthy. It's hard to say what state the chrome is underneath the dirt. The front of the camera doesn't look too bad. Sort of a huge bump here to go with the warts on the rear, and of course not much paint around that door either. You can see where it used to be, there's still a few remnants there, relics from a bygone age, but the rest of the paint's gone from there. Oh well, I think that this one will be worth taking apart, stripping down, cleaning, reassembling, and I'll make a good camera out of it. A great project for a dirty day. I'll show you, I'll bring you back when there's something interesting to show. You've seen me stripping down these things so often, it's probably no fun left in that, but you can watch the reassembly once everything's clean and ready to go. Well, the mystery of the occasional jamming up of the film advance has been solved. This little piece of metal here is the tip of a frame counter spring, like that, and that is broken off, and it had fallen down here. Now almost certainly at various times it had fallen into the gears and jammed things up, and that's why just occasionally the thing wouldn't move at all.